So how well do you feel that you understand your stakeholders and the problems that they are worried about? How well do you feel that your people understand stakeholders' diversity and the problems that they may have? And how do we get people to change quickly, particularly when they might not want to? Engineers can be considered to love solving a problem and solving a puzzle, but are they always solving the right puzzle and occasionally perhaps jumping to a conclusion? So imagine that you have a friend called Sam and they have a brother. And Sam's brother always steals the biggest piece of cake. But this time, Sam wants to take that piece of cake for themselves, but their brother is heading down the corridor to the kitchen as we speak. So which one of these pieces of cake is bigger? Which one is Sam going to pick? You haven't got long, you've got 5 seconds. So your time's up. Which one did you pick, and which one do you think Sam picked? Now, if we were thinking about it a little bit more and looking at a little bit more information, if you just look at the size of it, they're about the same. Perhaps we thought about it too quickly and we've jumped to a conclusion. But actually, in this particular case, it didn't matter. You didn't have long and you didn't have all the information available to you. So good morning, my name is Luke Hamner, and my colleague Ian Robbins, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about improving systems cultural change through problem exploration implementation. Now, we appreciate that's quite an academically sounding title, but if we just imagine this a bit more of our story of nudging the system a little bit. So what we'll cover, we'll talk about some of the issues in this particular domain and the approaches that we took to address those, some of the options that we explored while we were implementing them, and some of the observations that we took away while we were doing it. We'll draw a few conclusions, and we'll leave you with a few further thoughts. But if we just start with a little bit of an introduction first around some of this. As we were mentioning earlier, perhaps engineers really do love solving a puzzle and problems in general. But are they always solving the right problems? Is it the problem and direction that we should be going? Are we solving a problem that we enjoy just to get that endorphin rush of I've achieved something, rather than the one that we should really be thinking about? Now, in some cases, we might be looking at the problem definition and the solution definition and delivery of that as some sort of straight line of, I have a problem, I have an obvious answer to it. Now, that might be the case, but the reality of it is often more messy than we would like it to be. So what we've been doing over recent months is taking a lot of the information that is available out there and distilling that into something that is useful for us, of thinking about these 8 different areas of helping us navigate this particular messy part of our thinking. Thinking about the inputs and enablers and the stakeholders themselves, what is it that they care about, all the way through to pulling that together into what are their integrated set of needs when they're actually all interconnected to each other. What we aren't going to do today is talk about these in detail. We're going to take a slightly different tack and think about more of the human-centric elements of trying to get this change to be embedded into our way of thinking. Why is this important? Now, if we imagine if we spend some time going one particular direction, if we keep on going that direction and it's not the right direction, how much effort and resources are we potentially wasting going that direction? And heading up in the sunk cost fallacy of going, well, we spent so much so far, let's just power through and keep going. When actually, it may have been more beneficial for us to just pause, take stock, and go a different way. But that needing to change is too late is tough because we've already put a lot of resources into it. But what if you think about all of the organizations and businesses that we already have? They're still here, right? If we think about evolution theory a little bit of, well, they must have been successful in the past. If they're still here, they must have been doing the right things. That might not always be the case going forward. Adaptability is the important part of this. So survival of the engineering fittest. What is it that we need to do differently? The problems with some of that is changing that culture, particularly with bigger organizations, is hard. It takes time and a lot of effort from people to change that direction. So what are some of the issues relating to some of this from our perspective? Well, the first of it is, as I mentioned earlier, jumping to conclusions. And we'll pick on one first of something called a false start. And just to give you a little bit of an example, we'll borrow one from the 90s of Maxwell House introduced a product of ready-to-drink chilled coffee that you would find in your supermarket fridge aisle. Now, the intent of it was you would decant it into a coffee cup, pop it into your newfangled microwave oven, and you'd have a nice ready-to-go cup of coffee in the morning. It was about the size of a family orange juice carton. But unfortunately for them, it wasn't as successful as they were hoping it was going to be. Now, why was that? Well, the first of which is the intent to put it into your microwave oven. The packaging itself wasn't capable of doing that. It had metal foil in it, so you wouldn't really want to put your new microwave through the pain of a metal foiled carton. The other one of that is the size. This was a fairly large size. It wasn't single serve. You had to decant it. You had to take time to take it out of the fridge, put it into a cup, put it into the microwave, and then you have your coffee. Well, why was that any more convenient than at the time being able to just put some instant coffee and some hot water into a cup, or indeed from the time drip coffee that was more popular? It was also too small. So today we've been having coffee from a catering company. This wasn't something that you could then just put into an urn. You'd need loads of these to fill an urn and get it to go. So it wasn't the right size for an industrial type customer. So who was this actually for? Well, what if they'd slightly changed their tack with this and said, okay, what if it was single serve? What if it was something that you just pull out of the fridge and have a nice iced coffee in the morning rather than a hot one? Jumping the gun and perhaps being first to market with the iced coffee craze of the 2000s and still popular today, where many of you might have had a frappuccino or a cold brew. What about uncertainty? Now, if we cast our minds back to more ancient times of hunter-gathering and foraging, and any of you that are perhaps urban foragers, perhaps you found some berries and thought, okay, I'm going to try those, you'll have those, and the next day you didn't feel too great. Perhaps you would conclude, okay, those berries are the things that caused me the problem. But equally, it could have been anything else. It could have been some water that you had, or maybe there was an illness that was going around. There wasn't something that was beneficial. But our brains are lazy, and part of that particular time is where we develop that, where we're trying to understand that rather than wasting energy on something that we don't know and conserving that energy, we'll just ignore it and move somewhere else. But if we spent a bit more time thinking about that particular problem, investigating, maybe we would have had a brand new food source. But if we put that into a more modern context, perhaps you're on a cruise and you went to the buffet that perhaps was a little bit dodgy on your cruise, and the next day you weren't too well. Equally, it could have just been you haven't had your sea legs just yet. But what about changing ingrained culture, and particularly the speed that we need to do things? So if we take the example of commercial mobile phones, originally, a new generation was about 10 years, then 3, then 2, more recently 1. And you can probably look at your phone today, find that there's a new generation coming out in a few months. But that's not just applicable to that industry, it's applicable to many. If we just take military aircraft, for example, one generation took 22 years, another 20, and the most recent one is expected to be 17. So the pace of being able to introduce new things is increasing, and we need to think about how we can do that. What about inertia, and particularly corporate inertia? Now, if we take the example of Kodak, they were one of the first to patent and invent a digital camera, but it took them 16 years to actually put a product out. Why was that a problem? Well, other people were already putting products out in the 80s and starting to surpass them. Why did they do that? Well, they didn't want to cannibalize their very profitable consumable film business, and they hadn't thought about a new entrant to the market that was going to do that. Now, as we know, they're no longer on the world stage and went bankrupt in 2012. So what could they have done differently to actually change that? What do we think links some of these things together? Well, from our perspective, it's the idea of experimentation and exploration, of how can you look at things in different ways and in different scales and do things in smaller chunks to see if you can test your assumptions and work through those uncertainties. So just to summarize, our brains prefer the solution space. Why is that? It's easier to think about the solution than the problem. It takes us more effort to think about how we go and solve that problem. Complexity and pace is increasing, as we've heard from many people over the course of these 2 days. We need to do things faster, but things are becoming more complex. How can we rectify those two things together, of having to do things quickly, as well as having to slow down to think about them a bit more deeply? So we feel exploration and experimentation helps that particular problem. So I'll just hand over to Ian, and he's going to take us through some of the approaches taken that we've explored with this.
So yeah, tackling the issues of ingrained culture and jump into the solution space is hard. And there's many approaches we could use. And there's not a single or a handful of approaches that's going to solve all the problems. So I'm going to take you through a few of the ones we've used and tell you a bit about them, where they've come from, and what we found. So firstly, there's many aspects to systems engineering. I know you all know. There's architecture, MBSE, agile, all these good things that would help. So we chose to look at problem definition and lay a foundation for building these things. And we didn't want to dilute the focus. We wanted to put a lot of effort into this area, and the power of one, that is. So the point there is we're trying to avoid the risk of being spread too thinly and not achieving what we set out to. So why the problem space? Well, a lot of people think that requirements are the start of a project, but requirements aren't the start. I know a lot of people here will agree problem definition or understanding the problem is where it really begins. Technology is becoming more complex than ever, so we need to become better at capturing and developing a system definition. The danger of rushing to the solution space can be an expensive mistake to make. We might end up with overcomplicated solutions or adding unnecessary features or even building the wrong thing. So it's really important to understand the problem space. We need to consider everyone involved, get a common understanding. We need to manage their expectations. And we need to identify risks early, left shift wherever we can, so we can create a space and opportunity to do something about it before it's too late. So how did we go about this? Well, there's many approaches. So we chose to come up with a few and try them in parallel. And in doing so, we wanted to reach out to as many people as possible and get them involved rather than just telling them what we want them to do. And these approaches, we're going to take you through 9 of them today. They can fall into 3 categories. We've got forums, we've got guidance, we've got activities. Now, forums are that opportunity to get people's perspectives or their needs, make sure it's considered or heard. The guidance is, there's lots of techniques that we could use. And there's not necessarily one technique that is the best. So what we're trying to do here with the guidance material is make sure that there's a range of techniques, and it's not which is the best, but what technique would I use for which context. And we looked at activities as well. So activities, if we think what a successful outcome is, it's not a new process that claims to solve all the issues. We want to demonstrate how to use these techniques, how they will help. So if we start looking at forums, I'm going to take you through 4 approaches that we looked at in forums. They're all similar, but subtly different. So the first one is communities of interest or working groups. And if we think in a large organization, it's hard to get widespread awareness or engagement. So the communities of interest is really trying to create an environment to spark an interest or bring people on the journey, introduce them to the sort of direction the business is intending to go in, but also listen to opinions, concerns, or just what they're thinking. You know, maybe they've got an entirely different idea. Steering groups, next approach in forums, similar to communities of interest, but here we're acknowledging the different levels within the business. So there'll be perspectives and motivations at different levels, and the business operations level will differ to that of the applied projects. And also looking at how these levels can interact. You might be able to find that one level can influence another and help with some of the cultural or political challenges that we face. The third approach in forums is multi-channel communications. So this is a bit of an obvious one, why not just reach out and tell people? But it's a hard one to do because everyone's busy. There's existing commitments or deliverables, and people respond in different ways to different forms of communicating. Some people like written communications, some prefer presentation or a workshop or getting stuck into an activity. So the idea of the multi-channel communications is just to really appreciate everyone's different and will respond different ways. So we'll use a variety of techniques and cast a net out there to try and get anyone that would want to be involved, get them involved. The last approach in forums was that of roadshows. So here we traveled around the sites and advertised it. It was a real sort of boots on the ground approach. It's creating that opportunity for people to come say hi. Maybe they've heard about the work that's going on in the business. Maybe they want to know more. Have a face-to-face and that platform for a question and answer, and just try and help people realize what's going on and how it can help them. And a bit of a byproduct of the roadshow is, with that, you'll have some sort of digital comms going out as well. So even if people can't make the roadshow, maybe they're working remotely, maybe they've got a big delivery, so they're really consumed. But just the event of holding the roadshow, it creates that discussion. So people will talk within their teams, and the questions will ask through the business. The next category is guidance. I've got two approaches in this one. The first one is a bit of an obvious one, guidance material. And it's very much can be an output from the communities of interest. There's lots of ideas or views on best practice. Each could be with pros and cons. There's also, an engineer, employee might have tools and techniques that has worked for them for many, many years, but they won't necessarily have all the tools and techniques to help them in future situations. So the idea of the guidance material is to bring all this knowledge into one place and make it accessible, so it's more in a context of a day in the life of one of our employees. And it's built from wider industry knowledge as well as localized knowledge. So it's really trying to help people be prepared or brush up if they want to go back on something they've not done for a while. The second approach in guidance is that of worked examples. Accessible guidance material while demonstrating applicability and how it adds value to business activities. It's a bit of a mouthful. What I really mean by that is, in worked examples, it's a collection made of historic assessments, could be case studies, lessons learned, could be current activities happening right now and the challenges people are facing, or it could be anticipated future situations from emerging tech or new products, new projects. The final category is activities. So the approach here was pilot projects. So again, these aren't necessarily things that are new, and I imagine people have done or been involved in things like this, but the reason I wanted to bring up pilot projects is it's a small activity, and it's for an agreed duration of time. So a direction stated, something is trialed, and there's an option to stop at the end of it. That way it reduces or removes the risk to the wider business, and if there's an output that will benefit, then we can roll it out when we're ready. The next approach in activities is safe-to-fail activities. So it's very similar to pilot projects, but the distinction here, or the reason it's a separate activity, is it's designed to explore an assumption or an idea. There's no pressure from a specific deliverable, a product, a milestone. The aim here is just to learn something new. Maybe you had an assumption or an idea, and you explored it, and it didn't work. That's okay. So the final approach is career development. So that's an activity in itself. If we think we're building this guidance material and we're saying we're putting in techniques, worked examples on how to do problem definition, then we should create competencies to reflect these problem definition skills so that engineers and employees that are utilizing them can get the support they need to grow, but also the recognition for the achievements they make. So in summary, requirements aren't the start. Understanding the problem is. And we decided to look at problem definition, and we didn't want to dilute the focus. And we did that with lots of parallel activities. And we saw that doing some in parallel gave some benefits through the roadshow and the digital comms at the same time. So we used the three categories. The first is forums, communities of interest, steering groups, multi-channel comms, and roadshows. The next was the guidance material and examples. And the thing that made it unique here was we very much pitched it as a day in the life. The context here is a day in the life of our employees. Really trying to make it as accessible as possible. Trying not just to fill it with textbook scenarios or sunny day case studies. It's like, you know, what was the issue that someone had and what made it difficult, and is that something that could happen again? So real sort of day in the life. And then the final category was that of activities. And that was more just to create the space and opportunity to try it and say, it's okay, have a go. Because it's only by having a go that we can then use these things and see the benefits and hopefully make the right thing and not the wrong thing. All right. So we're going to look at some of the options explored now.
So as Ian mentioned, I'm sure many of you are sat there and thinking, none of that is new. And that's entirely the point. There's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of books, guidance material, websites, videos about how to do things well. But at the same time, we still see projects fail. Businesses disappear, and startups that don't manage to do what they intended to do. So why is that? There must be reasons why that it's not working for a lot of those things. And some of the things that we found as we were exploring some of this is, for example, language choice and how important it is for the type of language that you want to use with different types of people. So if we just take the example of the phrase global warming, well, what does that kind of words conjure up in your mind? Now, in 2008, this particular phrase was used more than 370 times in US professional publications, and many more times in public communications and when people were having a conversation about it. But it wasn't particularly popular. Well, what replaced it? By 2021, the usage of that particular phrase was down to less than 160 times in professional publications. And it was replaced with the phrase climate change. Well, why was that? It conjures up a very different response for what people are actually trying to engage with it. You're talking about change. It's harder to refute, whereas global warming, you can say, there's some snow over there. It's not warm, is it? But with climate change, it's harder to do. And in fact, even that phrase is starting to dwindle and be replaced with a new one of climate crisis. How are we going to get something done much sooner because it is such a big problem? What about something that is a bit more closer to home at the moment? So the words experiment versus pilot. And as Ian mentioned, what do these conjure up? Or perhaps for some people with experiment, the word experiment, it would be, well, I'm testing a hypothesis. I'm trying to understand what it is that we want to do. We want to get to a point and see what we want to do about it after that. Other people might perceive it as mad scientists, or you're stuck in a lab for years and wasting resources and time and money trying to explore something that may never go anywhere. Both of those perceptions perhaps are valid. But at the same time, if you look at the word pilot, and as Ian mentioned, it has a perhaps different connotation. If you're looking at something with a clear direction, we're going this way, we are going to do this. Where do you want to get to? We're going to get to here. What are you going to do then? Well, we're going to de-risk it so we're not going to have this applied to the whole business or organization. We're just going to try it here. And then if we want to, we can change it or we can roll it out much further. Why is that important? Well, different stakeholders might engage with those words and respond to them differently. And for us, both of these two things end up in the same place. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to understand whether you want to go somewhere, but you might not get there if you use the wrong language. Another one to think about is the idea of rapid baby steps. As I'm sure many of us in the room have seen toddlers and babies experiment with the world around them, whether it's putting something in their mouth and saying, can I eat that? Or whether it is putting one foot in the other, am I going to fall over? Or am I going to start to walk? How do we do things in much smaller chunks to be able to do things faster overall? So to give you an example, from our perspective, we wanted to make the best use of our year-long industrial placement, so people that are with us from university for a year, and then they will go back to university and hopefully join engineering, industry, or academia after they finish their courses. So what we decided to do was give them the choice of a limited set of options of projects and say, here's some things that we'd like you to explore for us. We haven't got the time to do it, but you might have. And we left them to their own devices and came to us for help when we wanted to. Now, that was just a few industrial placements to begin with, but we were getting really good feedback from them. We were getting good feedback from the people that were engaging with them. So we expanded it to all of the systems engineers in one line of business, continued to get more positive feedback. And we thought, okay, well, why can't this be multidisciplinary? What if we extended this to all of the industrial placements that we had across all of the engineering disciplines in our line of business? It continued to show promise, and we had more people getting involved and more positive feedback still. To the point where we've got to this year, where there's so many of them that are involved in it, we've had to run 2 projects at the same time. And hopefully going forwards, we'll be able to do this across different lines of business and not just one. And the point about this is we've been able to do this in smaller chunks, test it, see if it works, do a little bit more, and pivot where we needed to and make some changes. But that's just one example, and you could do that in many different ways. So I'll hand you back to Ian to talk about some of the observations that we've seen from this piece of work.
So yeah, we're going to look at observations around those approaches, and I know I threw a lot out there, so do ask me any questions afterwards if you want. What we'll do for the observations is we'll just go through the 3 categories: the forums, the guidance, and the activities. So with the forums, we had communities of interest, steering groups, multi-channel comms, and roadshow. And what we saw by doing this was there was a definite increase in discussions through the business and the teams and asking questions. And we saw that through people coming directly to anyone that was already involved in it, asking questions, wanting to know more about it, more guidance, more support, more assistance. And that in turn led to an increase in people wanting to come to the community of interest as well. So what we saw there was a real organic growth just by, getting the word out there so that people get this seed of inspiration. So it was a real sort of natural cultural change. With the guidance material, now we could have created a big, complete set of guidance and released it in one go. But we chose to do it in stages, and this was also partly so we could mature it in stages based on feedback if we really wanted to keep it in that day in the life of a Leonardo engineer. I know what a lot of guys do, or employees, but there's many parts of the business that I've not seen yet. So maturing the guidance, releasing it in stages, and we saw with the number of views and the online material would spike when we did a release. People would digest it, you'd get a little dip, people would be anticipating the next release. So we'd do another release, and we'd get a spike, and then a dip. And then we could incorporate other things like the lunchtime learner, where all this really was a short presentation online to take people through the existing guidance material, which again points people to it. So it's really just that consistent engagement creating a steady growth. When we ran the roadshow, we saw a significant spike in the online views of the material. And this, again, this shows quite a good example of using the approaches in parallel, because the spike wouldn't necessarily correlate directly with the footfall on the days of the roadshows. But it's more the advertising around it, the comms that went out, gets people talking about it and interested. And so, again, if they're busy or they're working off-site, they'd still go and check out the guidance material. So a real sort of good example of how small activities in parallel can really show quite a significant change in the culture or how people approach this. The final category was observations, activities. So this one, if we think back, one of the main motivations of this was changing the ingrained culture and stopping people rushing to the solution space. So the activities were built around problem definition and not rushing to the solution. And there's definitely been a shift in how people discuss projects. They're talking more about what needs to be done rather than how we're going to do it. They're looking at the problem. What is it that is the challenge rather than let's go build something, how are we going to do it? So that sort of walk before run. And even that little shift of thinking more about what needs to be done gets people thinking about the problem in a different way. As people are thinking more about the users or the operators or supportability and safety and all the different aspects that need to be considered. So yeah, we've covered a lot of ground there. So I'm thinking how best to wrap this up. It's old habits that are ingrained in the culture. And it's these habits that have proven to be successful in the past might have masked the root cause of the difficulties that we face. And so we've really had to try and tackle that, but in a way that isn't a forced process. So all these approaches are trying to get people to have that natural cultural change, allowing people to think about things slightly differently. We're doing that through regular engagement and trying to get continual growth of people involved in this area. And we saw there's a hunger for it. There's an interest. It's I kind of wasn't sure at the start how people would respond, but it was really encouraging to see that there is that interest. People do come directly and ask to find out more about it and how it could help them. And I think there's been some real projects that have tried to apply some of these techniques. And one of the interesting bits of feedback was that we've got products that take years to develop. And there might be one that's towards delivery. But in the latter stages, there's been some discussions of some new emerging tech that there might be an aspiration to get it involved, included into the product. Now, that might be an agreed change of scope, or it could be an entirely different project for a future bit of kit. And that means it can get very muddy quite quickly, and the people that are trying to do the job might end up in a situation of, what is it you want me to do? So problem definition has really helped create a framework or a structure so that it can separate and protect the delivery from the future emerging tech, but also allowing that to happen, giving it a space to promote and develop it. So where to from here? So we saw some real benefits from the roadshow and the comms and the spike in the guidance material. So little things like that had quite a big impact. So all these little approaches, continual engagement, it's nudging the system. It's not forcing something onto a large amount of people, but it's trying to bring them on the journey. We're going to look at doing more worked examples based on real activities in future ones, turn it into training, have some clinics, or the community of interest. As the guidance material becomes more mature and complete, needs to be a shift in the community of interest. And the natural way to take that is to see who's using it. Can they come along and show us their successes or their struggles and what we can do to help support that? Wondering what you found. This is not an isolated issue. I've worked in a few different industries, and it's a very common problem. So have you found any similar challenges, and how have you tackled it? And also, if we think back to the guidance material being in the context of a day in the life of a Leonardo engineer, really trying to make it accessible and applicable to the challenges that consistently occur. So it'd be good to hear what Incosi in general think of that.
So just to summarise a little bit about what we've talked about this morning. So first we started to talk about some of the issues of perhaps jumping to conclusions or the uncertainty that we have to work through and the inertia that we have in larger organisations. Some of the approaches taken, such as safe-to-fail investigations. The options that we'd explored as part of this, so thinking about how we select the language that we use with different people and what's going to respond to their way of thinking and their perceptions. And some of the observations, such as being able to walk before you can run, and then hopefully building that momentum going forwards, and some of the conclusions that Ian has covered. But if we leave you with nothing and you take nothing else away from this particular presentation, we feel that engineering culture is often solution-centric rather than problem-centric. It ends up going that way more often than we would like it to. We really need it to be more problem-centric. So in our case, treating an organisation itself as a system has allowed us to realign our culture and be more problem-centric through the 9 parallel initiatives that Ian took us through. There's great guidance out there already. How do we make the best use of all of that guidance and distilling it into something that is really useful for your context and what it is that you want to do? We can't always just take things as they are already printed and just run with them, as it may struggle to stick for the people that you're working with. So this was our story of making something that's quite difficult a bit more easy. Thanks very much for listening to us. Hopefully you found some of that interesting. If you do have any questions for us, we'd love to take them either now or if you want to find us at any of the points during the breaks later today. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Luke, Ian, thank you very much for that. Open the floor for questions. We've got about 5 minutes. Gentleman here, just introduce yourself.
Good morning, Tom Ash from Jacobs. Just a question on friction. So you talk about cultural change and realigning culture. So, and there's theories out there about congruence between the culture of the organisation, the culture of the individuals. So where did you find the friction as you're trying to align culture? And I'm thinking the two that jump out are obviously communities of interest of the engineers who want to do the best thing, want to do the best practice, and the steering groups who, by definition of being senior management, may want subtly different things in terms of being solution-focused. So where were the frictions and do you have those problems of aligning cultures?
So I think you're right. Of that particular area is one of them. Of the differences, and we were mentioning there about the language choices of explaining it to different people and what it means and benefits for them. It often ends up being good for all people. So engineers might have one particular view on it, and the senior managers might have a different one. But if you can explain it in a way that is beneficial to both, then you're heading in the right direction already. Particularly with things like the communities of interest, what we tried to do was layer these approaches. So we had working groups who were focused on the day-to-day, delivering something and getting something matured. We then put that into our communities of interest and go, here's something, go and beta test this for us, go and try it, see if it works for you, give us the feedback, what other issues have you got? And what the steering group was allowing us to do was flow that up to them and say, look, we've done this little bit of work, we're showing you the progress, we're showing you that momentum going forwards, and then giving us a little bit more steer of, oh, well, you perhaps haven't thought about this thing over here that's a bit more important for us, how can you weave that into your thinking? And it's allowed us to be a bit tighter with having that conversation with all of them. Any more areas of friction that you can think of?
No, that's good.
Great question, thank you.
Yeah, Mike Jackson. Changing sort of groupthink and culture is really difficult, as you're saying. You know, great suggestions. I wonder if something more radical is needed. It seems to be you've got to get behind what people's worldviews and test their assumptions. And the thing that's becoming popular is red team thinking, which you may know in the military everywhere they use. It was looked at whether it could have helped at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I didn't know the extent to which red team thinking is used in industry to challenge people's assumptions and radically getting them to think differently.
It's a great point, and we do actively use those, particularly in Leonardo, where we've got something that we are not sure about. We would get someone that's someone or a team of people that is a very different opinion, perhaps, or they just have not been involved with this particular thing and go and critique it. So we do that in a few different ways, specifically with red teams. And you could argue our design review process is specifically about exploring that, of going, okay, we're people who have designed this. Can you bring in a bunch of reviewers that have got nothing to do with this, have never seen it before, and have an experienced engineer look at it and go, tell me why this is good. Tell us what it is that you've done, what are the decisions you've made, and what are the risks that you're carrying forward. Now, we could be doing this more, probably, in places where we've got really novel things of going, is this actually going to work? But also having that environment of being, it's safe to say things, of saying, this isn't going to work, and what can we do about it, rather than, this isn't going to work, why have you wasted our time? And we're hopefully more towards the, this isn't going to work, how are we going to make it better? Anything else, Ian? That's good. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. I think we've got time for one more.
Hi, Matt Wyndham from UCL, yeah. So I see a lot of engineers in my MSc course, and they write lovely dissertations, and they're very solution-focused. And my effort is often, don't tell me what your answer is yet. Tell me what your research question is. And we spend a lot of energy individually saying, the research question is the lovely thing. It's not what you've got to get away from. It's the lovely thing in itself. And that's one-to-one. We know that the cultural shift in the individual requires a lot of kind of guidance and a lot of bedtime for the individual to grok that. What's your scale? Can you tell me how many people are you talking about, and what kind of length of time? My problem space is one engineer, 1 year. In my office. I don't know what your problem space is.
So I think fortunately in the larger organizations we have such a breadth of types of work where it's whether it's a short research piece that's internal private venture of do we want to do this, through to multi-year, possibly decades-long programs that are enormous with lots of people involved. The principle of understanding the problem is still applicable to all of them. And it's really useful for us to understand what people can take. So the approaches that we've talked about on one of the earlier slides of, here's 8 things to think about as an approach to help you through the mess of understanding what your problem is, can scale to any of those problems if you want to. It is more about, what do you want to do for the scale of problem you're working on? You don't have to do all of this to great levels of depth. You can just look at some of this. But throughout history, many people have said, a problem well understood is a problem half solved. So in our case, that's the same thing of saying, have you actually thought about this? Have you gone and talked to some people who might care about this? And what's their opinion on this problem? And even just getting that through to people of, go and talk to someone and don't just sit in your own little silo of stewing on this problem, has been really beneficial from us. Ian?
That's good. I think we'll draw that to a close, so we have time to start the next paper on time. Luke, Ian, thank you for your answers. Thank you for your questions.
Okay.